Hey everyone, welcome back. This is a data visualization lecture, but we're going to specify really a little bit more about how we can communicate with these visualizations. I'm going to have a hard time talking tonight, aren't I? Yes, those data viz, we are going to have a hard time talking about them, but we are going to talk about them, and we're going to talk about how you can talk with them, how you can get your point across best. Before we get that far along, let's take a look at the class logistics kind of stuff. So coming up very importantly this Friday is your first assignment, which is a draft of your final, as you know. So your project proposal needs to be in this Friday by midnight, and we need you to have a solid idea of what you're going after so we can give you feedback on it, right? It doesn't have to be the full thing. It is not going to be anywhere near the full thing, I'm sure. But we have to have some sort of a clear understanding of what you're going after and what that would involve, okay? So also there will be a reading number 4 that's going to come out at the end of this week so that you can get that done by the week after, November 13th. All right, so more details on submitting the project proposal. You're going to do it on Gradescope. So 1 submission per group. You will add all of your group mates to the submission on Gradescope. Whoever does the deal, you'll have to elect somebody out of your group. If for some reason you want to make revisions and so on and so forth, feel free. Just keep submitting all the way up until deadline. All right, we will grade the most recent submission. And of course, while doing this, you should be making some progress towards the final project. And after this is turned in, you should continue to make progress towards the final project. Right? It's not a matter of do it now and then don't do anything for 3 weeks and then panic. No, it would be better to work steadily, right? All right. So, and yeah, the big deal once you get to the real final project at the end of this quarter, you're going to start with your assignment 1. You can copy and paste from assignment 1 into the final project, but you need to, of course, fill out the final project with all the changes that you've made, hopefully incorporating our feedback. You should then add additional sections, right, that are going to be special to the final project. So along the lines of the special sections, we're going to ask everybody to contribute a survey about what they thought all their teammates' contributions were. So you are going to tell us what all your teammates did, and your teammates are all going to tell us what you did. All right? Extra credit, as you all love, is going to be what you can do to actually implement this if that is your bag. All right? There's no opportunity, no requirement for you to do so, but the opportunity will get you up to an extra 15 points. Okay? And when you do submit your final project, you're going to also submit the code in the form of either our Markdown document or a Jupyter notebook. Okay? So that can be discussed more at another time, but now let's head into our second installation of data visualization. Yes, visualization. So today's learning objectives are: we want you to understand how you can improve a data viz. And it's going to be an iterative process. You're going to do it, realize how it's not quite good enough, and do it again and do it again. Each time learning something and getting your way, inching towards a very nice result. We want you to be able to analyze a viz and describe both its good and not so good parts, right? Hey, here's some not so good parts. Oh, and I did not put this in the form. So, right, this is a repeat anyway from a previous lecture, right? We want to start with the idea of what is not a good data viz. Can somebody tell me what about this data viz does not look good? Or aesthetically, or also informationally, communication-wise? All right, smart guy in the front. Yes, the just having the cable news chyron underneath it is A, not aesthetically pleasing, and B, pretty much tells you that there's little information content here, right? Okay, but beyond that, there's several problems with this graph. The number one biggest informational problem is that look at where the bottom of the y-axis is, right? What's that value there? It certainly is not 0, right? And we know that if a graph doesn't show 0, then we're starting most of the way up it. And that means that this, quote, big difference here, right? That is not such a big difference compared to all the rest of the data, which is down there going to 0, right? So that's one of the main ways in which this is not a great viz. Also, gotta love that 1970s Harvest Gold color scheme with unnecessary gradient coloring. Okay. Unnecessary levels of significance that don't mean a dang thing. So there's all kinds of things in which this is not a very good graph, aesthetically or informationally. And we're going to help you learn to spot those and fix them. So this is where we are in our path and our journey towards data science guru, right? You've gotten through things like defining the question, getting and cleaning the data. We've talked about models and whether we're exploring the data, fitting models, and now we're at communicate the results. So effective communication is very important, right? Because in the end, it's really the only thing people that are important are going to see. They're not going to see all the hard work you did in doing the analysis. They'd have no idea how difficult data cleaning is. They just think you mostly sit in your cubicle and sip coffee all day, right? They don't know that you're continually improving all these things. So what they do know is when you present, when you show off your work, and if you want to set yourself off from others, it should really help to do something very cool. And when you do something very cool, you don't want to just be flash, bang, whiz, wow, right? Because lots of people, A, see through that, or B, get annoyed by it. What you want to provide is good information. And when you provide information to somebody, you need to start by thinking about the person you're trying to communicate with. You need to give them a moment in your head. You need to think about what it's like to be them, how they're going to react to this information, how you can best give them the information in ways they can understand and absorb it, okay, in ways which they are prepared to accept, especially if you're producing difficult news, right? So that's the kind of data communication that we're talking about right now. Now, the basics of data communication is still a visualization, okay? You've still got to produce the viz, and viz are still the same ones that we've talked about already, right? Histogram and density plots are good for showing you single variables and what's going on, right? Inside a variable, what does it look like? The histogram is the more raw version, right? And the density plot makes some assumptions. It tries to say, okay, we think this is probably some sort of smoothed function, and this is what we think it might look like. And picking a smoother is, of course, a choice. Okay, scatter plots are great for understanding relationships between two variables. Bar plots are good for looking at counts and things like that among different categories, males or females, vegetarians or not, etc. When you want to compare categories, especially with a statistical method, you want to do something like a box plot, right? Which are different. There are different ways to look at, is A distributed differently than B? Box plot makes very few assumptions and really lets you see various kinds of distributions and how they relate to each other. And finally, a table is always good if you have small amounts of data. Now let's add in a few more basic tools to your already growing arsenal. Okay? So if you want to do a time series thing, if you want to plot a trend over time, then you are going to use something like this, right? Good old line graphs or line plots. You want to do just one thing. Maybe you want to do two. So this is like we want to see maybe, is there some relationship between A and B? Right. This is not hard evidence that there's a relationship between A and B. Just because they move up and down together, or seem to, is not hard evidence. But it does suggest there might be something there to investigate, something to use a more elaborate analytical tool to see if there is some sort of relationship between A and B. All right. And of course, we can just plot loads of variables that way. Now, another form of a bar chart is to do a grouped bar chart, where we're trying to do count information and some other kind of we're trying to do counts, but we're trying to do it on two separate categorical variables at the same time. So in this case, this is your data from the survey, and we have what year are you in your studies? So year 1, year 2, don't ask me why that's out of order with year 3. That's my fault. Year 4 and year 5. And at the same time, we have people who are not vegetarians and people who are vegetarians who are in year 1. So we've split up year 1 into vegetarians and not vegetarians, right? So we can imagine different ways in which you can use this kind of thing to understand relationships between two different categorical variables. Now, I do have something to say about you people, right? All you people out there filling out your surveys. I mean, are you a vegetarian was a free-form answer. I expected to have to do some data cleaning. I'm not a vegetarian. I eat like a vegetarian quite a lot of the time, in part because I like it, and in other part because I've just got long habit because I've dated or lived with vegetarians for a good chunk of my adult life. So I can, not from the inside, but I think say fairly authoritatively, pescatarian is not a vegetarian, right? I'm pretty sure fish are not vegetables, last I checked. Nor would I say only eating chicken makes you a vegetarian or even almost a vegetarian. But hey, that's just me. So what you can see here, more than me just being a smarty, is that this is a view into how it looks to clean data. All right? So you all produced results from Are You a Vegetarian, which the unique results of were no, yes, pescatarian, capital P pescatarian, et cetera, et cetera. And none of those are yes, no answers, or only 2 of them are yes, no answers, and the vast majority of them are not. So I had to map all the pescatarians to no, and I'm going to say vegans are yes, just because that was the Uber category, right? I will eat chicken goes to a no, and then I had to change all those into a yes, no that we could plot in this kind of a graph. All right, so that's a complete aside. That's data cleaning redux, and it will just give you a sense of what it looks like to do this kind of cleaning. All right, stacked bar charts are another way to do the same kind of two categorical variables. Instead of having them side by side like we just did, you can stack them up. This is especially great when you have things that are proportions that you want to emphasize. All right. If we wanted to emphasize not the raw number of vegetarians here, but what percentage of first years are vegetarians, then a stacked bar system would have been a great way to do that because it would show you that efficiently. So just a quick reminder, best practices, you want to be sure to start with the right kind of viz for what you're trying to accomplish. All these man, my tongues are not ready for it. You want to use good color. You want to label your axes. Make sure everything is visible. It's got to be big enough. It's got to be clear enough. It's got to be not obscured by different parts of the plot. Okay? Make sure those numbers add up to whatever they should. You know, if it's percentages, probably 100. Okay? You want to make it easy for your reader and not deceive. Okay? We've kind of got that. Accomplishing all of these and communicating a story takes time, intention, and iteration. It takes you multiple tries to get this kind of thing right? You have to create a good analysis, but then you have to work over and over and over again to get to the level of something that is a clear and easy bit of communication to transfer the knowledge that your analysis generated. All right. So let's inspect a few of these visualizations. So let's compare this one to the Fox News one just a little bit ago. So they have similar problems, right? This one also is not rooted at 0, but it's much more reasonable in the sense of the last one was rooted at like the top 8-9%, right? This one's rooted at the top 50%. Also, it's generally accepted that when you're looking at trends on a line chart, that oftentimes what you're after is small changes compared to like the big situation, right? So if this was down to 0, we're generally interested in the changes here. So that is more accepted that in a line chart versus a bar graph that you would not root at 0. Right. But I still won't say it's a good practice. It's just less bad. Okay? Well, but other choices here are much better. First off, it doesn't have any, so like a lot of things are very clear about what this is. It doesn't have any easy to mistake elements. Everything's labeled like what each line represents. What these are here along the bottom seems fairly clear. They must surely be years, but you could potentially label that to make ultra clear. Okay, there's a lot of excess froofiness though, things that maybe are not very clear. But it's a more clear overall thing, in my opinion. I think the best way to improve this one would be to pick a simpler kind of color scheme. I'm not a big fan of these kinds of dark gray backgrounds. I think that it's just froof. I think that you could do a lot better with understanding what this is. Same median hourly rating earnings as white men could be something like it could say very explicitly, if these subgroups were part of this level, had this level of earnings, then they would be the same as white men. Okay. How about this data visualization? This one is highly problematic. We have zero idea of what it's talking about. This just says value over here. We don't know value of what, in what units. Okay. We can clearly see these are countries, but we don't really know what we should learn at all from this. So that leads us to this idea that what we're after is something which explains what we should take away from a graph, okay? We don't want to just give some numbers and leave it at that. We want to give some numbers and give an interpretation. That's oftentimes our goal. Here are the numbers that support my case that we should, start selling our pancakes in 7-Elevens. I don't know what the business case is. That doesn't sound like a good business case to me, but then again, I haven't bought any food from a 7-Eleven in about a decade. So, what are we going to do if we're trying to incorporate our understanding into some sort of clear communication package, right? What we're going to do is we're going to start off with what we did in the analysis, and we're going to try to think about how we can refine it to make it more clear, more presentable, more of a compelling story. All right? Let's go. So what if we did some sort of visualization of sales trend, right? And in this case, it was iPhone. Well, this shows you quite a lot of very nice communication in this graph. We can see the sales trend on the iPhone, but we can also see some other things to compare it against. We can see that iPad and iPod have not been for more than a decade very important for Apple's revenue stream. Okay? We can see that everything is cyclical, right? We can see the nature of the business, that what do you think those little cycles are? What are the bumps? Yes, you, young lady. Yeah, those are the release dates of brand new products when everybody has to have the newest and greatest, right? Yep. Excellent thoughts. All right. So, I think this is one of the most clear graphs we have seen recently. And if I could just get rid of that silly background, I would. All right. What's awesome about it? Well, the lines are directly labeled, tell you exactly what we're looking at. It has a clear focal point. And the reason we focus on that is because of that use of color. And only that is in color. And everything else is fade to gray. Right? It's clear what these axes are. We can see an annotation here which draws attention to a particular region that we're supposed to pay attention to, right? After the iPhone 4 was announced in 2010, more iPhones were sold than iPods for the first time. All right, it's relevant as we get our iPhone 12 today, which looks like an iPhone 4. Yay! All right, so this is also it's a credited source, so we can go find the data ourselves. That's pretty awesome, right? Inspires a lot of confidence. So this is the before and after, right? The before is when you were actually doing your analytic work. You found the sales data for the iPhone and you plotted it, and it was probably pretty ugly. It was just there for you to see the results, okay? But you're going to iterate and slowly improve this graph multiple times until you have something that is a beautiful finished product that you're willing to share. Okay, you don't do this for just any old thing. You only want to do this once you're ready to present. So, how are we going to go about doing this? How are we going to think about a process that leads us to a finished product that looks like that last graphic? Well, here's one sort of checklist or thought process that you can go through. You really have to start with, what is my point? What am I trying to accomplish? What do I want to communicate? All right? Once you know that clearly, now other things will naturally start to fall into place. How can you emphasize that point in a visualization? How can we pick the right kind of chart, the right kind of color and highlights and annotations to make it clear to somebody who's just glancing at this for 8 seconds, what is the point of this chart? Okay? And then we can do, once we've done that, we've got we've started with the goal, the point, we've gotten to the kind of broad outlines of what we're going to do with figuring out chart type and all that. Now we need to get into the nitty-gritty, the little tiny details where we start playing with aesthetics and, making the chart's text 2 points bigger. Or we decide to make it in a different font or in a bold font or something like that to make it more visible. We decide to change the background from that god-awful gray into just a nice white background. Okay? Those kinds of things. And in the end, we're going to have our beautiful chart. So how would this process maybe look? Right? We start with the kind of cheap and easy plot we make when doing this, right? And we have to start in the process. Number one, what's our point? Well, our point is that the iPhone is more successful than all other Apple products. Well, we can put that point directly in a title quite a lot of the time. And we can tell the viewer exactly what they need to take home from all this. So the next thing we can do is we want to, obviously, if we're going to compare against other products, we need to put those products in. All right, I'm going to get rid of my ugly face so you can see this. So here are these other products, but that's very confusing visually. There's not a lot that you can necessarily tell there on a quick glance. So we can gray the other products out because we don't really care so much about them. We only want you to be able to see this is different than that. So the red on our main product keeps our eyes on the prize, but the gray enables us to make the comparison easily without distraction. Okay, next we might want to use boxes and highlights. Sorry, I'm having my usual control problems here. Right, there we go. Use boxes and text to highlight the very important points, right? Like we said, we want to be able to show that this was the crossover point. This was when the magic happened, was in 2010. Now we have to think, how can we emphasize these points? And that's where these little boxes and annotations come in, right? This shows the place where the crossover between iPhone 4 and iPads happened, right? We need to make sure that viewers know exactly what we're doing, all right? So the final point is, can we tweak the aesthetics and the labels to make this super clear? So we want to label the units and numbers like we do here. We want to directly label lines of data so we know exactly what those represent. And finally, including the source of all this data. Et voila. So we have a beautiful information-packed graphic. So again, before and after, There were multiple iterations in this process, and that is critical to remember, not to get down on yourself, and also not to stop early. Oftentimes, one of a beginner's real mistakes is that they go, all right, this feels good to me, and then they present it to somebody else, and that somebody else doesn't like it at all. And they're like, come on, that's not a very good idea. Beginners often don't feel very confident in themselves, and they may get discouraged. You may feel like, I'm no good at this. Don't let yourself feel down. Don't stop, right? Everybody was a beginner at some point. And even experienced people will get negative feedback, and you will incorporate that negative feedback and you will use it to make your work stronger. Okay? I believe in you. Okay. So again, just a summary of this whole process. We started with a point. We emphasized it in various aspects of our chart, and we tweaked all the final little bits, number 3, to really drive home that point. All right, let us apply some lessons. Here is a chart which is in desperate need of improvement. Let's get your input. What do you think we can do better here? Bueller? Anyone? Yes. Thank you. I'm so glad you said that. You know, the color scheme is eye-blinding. I agree. This is a terrible color scheme. Nobody likes these aesthetics. Okay? But there's a couple of other kinds of really major things here. Second row? Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. Yeah. The 3D effect, totally unnecessary. Hello, 2002 is calling. They would like their 3D bar chart back. Yeah. No. That is, the reason that's out of style is that it's a waste of ink. I mean, it just adds nothing to the discussion here. It doesn't tell you anything. It only makes it more complicated visually. And making things more complicated generally obscures the point you're trying to make. Likewise, on another aesthetic judgment, I would also call out that terrible font that the y-axis is in. I mean, it makes it so hard to read those numbers. It's almost Comic Sans bold, but I'm not really sure what it is. So yeah, there's a lot of room for improving this. Okay? How about something like this? All the information, none of the added sugar. Okay? Okay. So in general, while you're doing this kind of work, you can highlight your points by using color. Okay? But using color like the Miami Vice color scheme we just saw, please don't, right? Use color well and sensitively. 2 big cases for using color in multivariate charts. Multivariate means lots of variables, right? If you have lots of things you're trying to show, oftentimes you'll use color to separate them. So if you want to show something which is gradations, then you use a color scheme like the one on the left here, okay? This is ideal for showing things like if all of these different bars represented data from different months, and there is a similarity here where nearby months are nearby in the calendar and time, right? Okay. Something where you want to show continuous values, like a heat map, okay? Like something which is like, there's lots of it over here, there's little of it over here. That's where you use gradients. But if you're trying to show categories or separate measures, completely separate, have nothing to do with each other, then you use a color map like this one, where near neighbors don't look anything like each other. Okay? You want to make sure to keep near neighbors away from each other in color perceptual land. Because again, people look at these things and their intuitions draw them in, okay? And what we want to do is we want to manage their intuitions. We want to manage the expectation a person has when looking at something. And most people will think if there's very similar colors that they're going to end up looking at very similar things, right? Okay, so something like this is important because color consistency helps you understand the chart. Or in this case, two separate charts, okay? So in this case, China's in red, and over here, China's in the dark green. And suddenly we have the UK in red. All right, if you're presenting two pieces of information in two separate charts, you'd best color match things so that Germany is always yellow, China is always hunter green, and the UK is always red, or whatever works for you. When you're dealing with lots of complex information, lots of variables, again, you want to probably highlight one or two things. Because if you ask people to understand a lot about a diagram like this, you're asking a lot. It's not impossible. When you need to convey very difficult and intricate information, you should definitely convey it in a way which shows the information, right? But you can only talk to a certain kind of audience that way. Many audiences are not going to be prepared to have a moment to really absorb a graph like that and to work at it hard enough to do so. Okay? However, something like this is easy to absorb because, again, we get the ability to compare one important thing against a lot of background information, and that is visually and cognitively rather easy. So, it's also important to choose intuitive colors, right? If you make hot things a cool color, or vice versa, good things to be red and bad things to be green, people get confused because mostly they have associations with some colors. Cool colors like blue and green are cool, right? Hot colors like orange and yellow are hot. So don't mix your categories. Finally, an important thing to do comes from, let's see, I have a book over here. Ugh. This is a classic. Nope. I'm so backwards. There we go. Look at that. The Visual Display of Quantitative Information by Edward Tufte. This is a classic. It goes through a lot of historical things. It shows you how dense information can be, how to show things clearly and well. Let's see, random stuff, right? Oh, look at this. Look what Tufte is saying on this page right here. He's saying, don't make 3D bar charts for the love of... All right. So there are many good books out there, but the idea of minimizing the, maximizing the amount of data and minimizing the amount of ink to show it is a Tufteism, and he's definitely the originator of that kind of idea. So let's go back. So how can we do this? Well, let's show an example. Here is a chart, I guess. It's a chart. I'm fairly uncertain what it's supposed to be telling us, but how could we make it better? All right. Right here, I'm going to ask you to go into the Google form link here I want you to take the pop-up quiz if you are here in Canvas, and if not, go to that link and take a look at that. I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on how to improve this graph and two others. I want you to think about them, sketch out what would be a much better idea than what we see at each one of these, and then give me a few words, like, 3 sentences or something, describing what a much better approach to this would be. All right, I look forward to your responses. So, welcome back. How could we do this in a much better way? Well, there is just so much chart junk here. This is a chart made to show you how bad chart junk can get. So first off, there's a set of labels here. Why do we need the same labels over here? Heaven only knows. And if we don't need a legend that's color-coded, why are these color-coded at all, right? This kind of background image is literally 2002 calling. And it's just ugly and horrifying. And even when Apple tried to force that on people in that one version of macOS that I can't recall because I excised it from my mind, this kind of textured like real stuff thing, nobody liked it, and they had to go back and get away from it. So, there's some overlap here and here. I don't know that anybody needs to be told that these are types of food, so we can get rid of almost everything about this graph. We can pare it down to the bare essentials of the information, which is how many calories per 100 grams. We don't have to say for different foods because I think that's pretty clear, right? Okay, here's another terrible chart. You will have already responded and taken a look at it. Let's see if you guessed, some methods that I'm going to show. How can we better understand this information by making a very different chart? Well, so first off, there is almost no reason that this chart has to be a bar graph. I mean, we're tracking over time information, and that immediately suggests a line chart in a time series. Okay? So this whole thing is going to get us a much more clear view of the changes over time than, for no good reason trying to stack bars on top of things. Now, remember, we're trying to communicate a story here. We're trying to tell people stuff about this data. So what is this giant gap, right? I don't know. It doesn't actually belong there. Okay, so that's not important to the story. Why were these closely matched until here, and then they started to diverge, these two lines? Well, it turns out we have a reason for that. Okay, so use your storytelling skills to show people how this information needs to be understood. What even is this? Well, I'll give you some hints. The pre and the post titles tell you about that we took a baseline measurement and then we did some sort of intervention. All right? A pre and a post means things were going along just fine, but we wanted to see if we tried something different, would it get better? So that's a post-treatment or a post-intervention, and a pre-treatment or pre-intervention. So I don't really know, but there's pie charts, so that's nice. Now I'm hungry for pie. Well, first off, we have to say, what is the point of what we're trying to do? I think we're probably trying to understand how this intervention did something to change the results. Okay? Well, how can we emphasize that? We can emphasize that by taking it out of an effing pie chart, because pie charts are not meant for showing change. They're meant for showing static proportions. And even that, they're not that great at. Okay? So if we want to show change, then maybe we want to show pre and post, before and after, in bar charts. Okay? How many people were bored by science before and after some sort of intervention, a program where kids were supposed to get excited about science, right? We had a large increase in the excited kids, so that's pretty good, and a big decrease in the okay kids. So, we can add extra narrative. We can say after the pilot program, 68% of kids expressed interest compared to 44% going into the program. Oh my, that is way more compact than all of this BS. And yet you can see it right here, the 30 and the 38 adds up to at 68 that are kind of interested, where 44% was the before. So, and again, we very clearly show what is the data, what is it that we are measuring or talking about. It is lovely when you can do this kind of thing to say exactly what you're talking about. There's also this kind of a chart, which shows you change before and after. Okay, this is sometimes called a waterfall chart, but fundamentally we have a before and an after, and we can see that some things went down and some things went up. Okay, a final lesson. Don't do this kind of stuff. Less is more, right? It's always nice to be clear and subtle. If you scream and use your caps lock, people don't pay attention to you, right? Okay. Now, lastly, I want to close out with an idea about the fact that fundamentally what we're doing is we are using graphics and visualization, but what we're really doing is we're just telling a visual kind of story. We want to make sure that, like all stories, our presentation of analysis is going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay? So, how does this work? You may recall from some language composition class you had. In the beginning, you have to provide some context and get your audience ready for what you're going to tell them. In the middle, you're going to actually show and tell. And at the end, well, you can remind them what you told them. Because repetition is just fine. These people have never ever had this information before. It may take them a couple of tries to absorb it. Okay? When you're doing this kind of communication, always keep in your head, who is your audience? What is your relationship with them? How can you get them to understand your viewpoint? Okay? So, what do you need your audience to know? What do you want them to do? What will your tone be when you are trying to get them to do something? Okay? So here's a little quick lesson in tone. All right? This is a graphic that's going to show us about the deaths in Iraq, the war in Iraq over the early 2000s. And clearly, they got bad and got better. Okay? And maybe the story is something like, nowadays the deaths are on the decline. Yay! All right? Or this is actually a manipulation of what very famous chart, because somebody published this one. All right? So this famous chart has turned this whole thing into a much worse tone, right? It said, this was terrible. This was bloody. It was awful. Okay? How is it doing that? Well, there's several elements. Okay? So here we had a regular chart where Y is vertical that way, more deaths going up. This one is flipped. Okay? Increasing deaths are going downwards. And the chart coloration has been turned into blood red. And that's giving the effect of dripping blood coming down a wall. Okay? So these are the same pieces of information, but their tone is radically different in how they're conveying that. Now, these design choices, like whether to say bloody toll or deaths on the decline, whether to be looking like blood dripping or just looking like a graph, right? These are the kinds of tone things that you need to decide how you're going to handle in any given situation. So clearly they're very different approaches to the same thing. Now, here's a little comparison. On the left is what we were just talking about. It's got this message that Iraq war is very, very bloody and it's a terrible thing. And it was highly influential as an infographic because everybody felt that impact when this was released, okay? Like you can see it's a very emotional kind of visualization. So the person on the right was not actually trying to obscure information, but ended up essentially doing that, okay? And the reason they did that was because they were highly inspired by this, okay? The topics are similar in that they're about death from violence. Okay, Iraq's bloody toll infographic, though, has this dripping blood. That's the nature of the graph. This graph over here has no such aesthetic, right? The nature of it just doesn't even occur because you've got this line here that is not really mimicking the dripping of blood. Yet it's following the same convention of the red up here and the inverted y-axis to allow the blood drip. So the person who created this infographic, they said they were inspired by Iraq's bloody toll. They said they wanted to provide that same kind of visual impact, but they just didn't realize their choices were actually not appropriate for this, right? This one just doesn't do it in the same way because it doesn't have that jaggedy histogram. And the thing is that both of these are obscuring the information because both of them are over elaborate. They're not letting the data shine through. They're trying to force you to interpret it in a particular emotional way, which again, can be good. That might be your point, is that you want people to feel that, but it certainly is not clear communication, right? The Iraq's bloody toll was immediately panned, at least for the fact that that inverted y-axis is confusing. People don't really understand. They may actually think this is where the data is. All right? They may see that flipped. For this one, it is absolutely the case that this kind of a strong, solid line makes you think this is the mountain, it's the white, right? And if you do that, you might think that here during the Stand Your Ground law, when it came into action, that gun deaths dropped. No, gun deaths went up because of this reverse y-axis, okay? This is actually an increase in gun deaths going down this way. So the Iraq's bloody toll got mixed reviews because it has a great aesthetic, but it's not great at communicating information. The gun deaths in Florida has both of them are bad. It's not good at communicating, and it's not got a great aesthetic because it doesn't have that blood dripping nature due to the shape of the histogram. All right. So I'm going to close out by just asking you to think about these things. Who, what, and how. These are how we communicate, all right? We need to think about those things and figure out how to do it. Lastly, I want to talk to you about presentation. All right. When you do presentation, try not to read directly off your slides. Try to create a narrative around the topic. Okay. I'm going to illustrate this by using everybody's favorite, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. I want you to just picture it in your mind. I'm telling you the story of Empire Strikes Back. We start off with the scroll, right? And then we hear it. Dun 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 dun. Here comes the Imperial fleet. Hoth is defenseless. Oh my goodness. Pew 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 pew. Luke crashes in Dagobah. He meets this funny green guy. Oh. Do or do not. There is no try, young Skywalker. Right? Like, just imagine the whole sequence and how the movie makes you feel. My apologies if you're one of those people who's never seen the movie. I understand. But this is a common cultural point that has a lot of resonance that people can really feel, and I don't have to actually tell the whole dang story, but I can just make you realize how the whole thing seems very vibrant and alive. Okay? Luke, I am your father. Search your feelings. You know it to be true. Well, what if instead I had slides? And I just sat here and I read. There was a rebel base that was discovered on Hoth, and the Imperial fleet scatters the main characters when they destroy the base. And Luke follows a vision to Dagobah and meets this small green old dude who teaches him things while speaking in riddles. So you get the idea, right? It's flat. I've lost eye contact because I've been reading. I know I'm not great at eye contact in this circumstance because of the very distracting screen right here, but the point is that I'm still trying to weave in and out the narrative and the story, and I'm trying to check in with you, the audience, even when I'm checking my slides, okay? That's the kind of thing you should aspire to do when you're communicating, because the narrative of Episode 5 is so much better than the bullet points of Episode 5, all right? The bullet points are there so that you remember what you're talking about. That's about it, okay? You're the one who has to bring the whole audience along, okay? You can use fancy stuff like animations, but you want to not distract with it. You want to inform, and you want to make sure that people understand everything you're presenting. Always introduce what the chart is. Show them what the axes are. This is in millions of Great British pounds. This is in, blah, blah, blah units. Okay? So, here's a little graphic showing you a clear progression of time, a clear number of active users, right? It tells us about this game, Moonville, active users over time. Okay? Or we could show it. We could demonstrate it growing over time as an animation. Okay? As a computer person, you get to the chance to use time as well as space. You can use that kind of animation to bring forth an understanding more intuitively than a plain graph. But again, be careful because it's a powerful aesthetic. You don't want to overuse it. All right. Finally, when presenting on paper, you need to put more on a single visualization than you can do in a big presentation. And you're going to benefit from doing lots more revisions and having people's feedback on what you've sent over. Okay? So here we are with a full infographic display. All right? With all the annotations that are going to help us understand the situation with Moonville. I'm getting over time here, so I'm just going to close out. I'm going to ask, oh, I did not put this in the uh, clicker thing, so it's my apologies. So do you think that this is a good graphic? Well, it's clearly labeled. It's a rooted graphic. I think all the things work very well. There is a color scheme that is gradated. Is that useful? Well, it shows the affordability index. So, yeah, but also, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that lines up very closely with the change in price of things from 2000. So, it's a confusing graph in that sense. We're not quite certain exactly what those color schemes are until we really get into it. Is this a good explanatory model? Okay. So this is showing climate change over time and where the projected warming is going, but it's not labeled. We're just kind of getting information only from the fact that this says very hot days. So maybe not such a good infographic. Right. So if you want to see awesome graphics, here are some lovely resources for you. Please do visit and look around. And there are several books. I've already mentioned the Alberto Cairo books. I've mentioned Edward Tufte. And some of this presentation is from the Nussbaumer. And the name of that book is Storytelling with Data. Right? So, at any rate, I hope you had a lot of fun. And I will check in with you again next time. Bye.